The courtroom clock read when I finally stepped out of my car. The divorce hearing was set for, but I wasn't in a rush. Let them wait. Let her sit there in that chair, glancing at the clock and whispering sweet nothings with her lover. Convinced they won, they thought my lateness was incompetence or despair. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that every tick of that courtroom clock was part of a plan. As I entered the courthouse, I imagined her expression. I pictured the way she would smirk, tilting her head toward him like they were partners in some victorious heist. Maybe they'd share a joke about how I couldn't even show up on time to lose everything. I could hear her laughing in my head, that same laugh that used to sound like music before I knew what it really hid. This wasn't just about losing a wife. No, this was about losing the woman I had spent a decade building a life with, only to find out she'd been constructing her exit strategy with another man. A man who sat at my dinner table and shook my hand. I'd been a fool for too long, and I'd spent the last few months making sure I'd never feel like one again. The courthouse doors creaked open, and I stepped into the chaos of legal proceedings. My shoes echoed down the marble hallway, each step steady and deliberate. I wasn't dressed to impress, but I knew the sharp navy suit and polished shoes would send a message. I was here to win, not to gravel room 304. I stopped outside the door and took a deep breath. The sounds of murmurs and faint laughter filtered through the heavy wood. Her laughter, it fueled me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a distraction. I was focused, clear-headed, and ready to flip the script. The courtroom went silent. The moment I walked in, heads turned, hers first. Her smirk faltered just slightly before she caught herself and leaned closer to him, as if his presence could shield her from what was coming. "Nice of you to join us," her lawyer said, his voice dripping with condescension. I ignored him. Instead, I locked eyes with her. She raised an eyebrow, her face a mask of mock concern. "You're late," she said, her tone light but laced with malice. "I know," I replied, my voice calm, almost conversational, but I wouldn't miss this for the world. I took my seat at the table, placing my briefcase beside me with a deliberate motion. Her lover sitting in the row behind her gave me a pitying smile. I wanted to laugh. Pity for me. He had no idea. The judge cleared his throat, signaling for the proceedings to begin. Her lawyer stood, launching into a rehearsed monologue about my supposed inadequacies as a husband, my inability to manage finances, and my general unfitness as a father. It was a performance, and he was good at it. I almost admired his confidence, but I didn't react. No interruptions, no objections. I sat there, hands folded, nodding, occasionally like I was just another spectator. Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them dig their graves a little deeper. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly adjusting my tie. I could feel the tension in the room. All eyes were on me, but mine were on her. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady. "I'd like to apologize for my tardiness. I had some urgent matters to attend to this morning, matters that will shed light on why we're here today." Her lawyer stiffened, clearly caught off guard. My wife exchanged a quick glance with her lover, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. I didn't elaborate. Not yet. Timing was everything. Instead, I turned back to the judge. "But before we proceed, I'd like to ensure that the full context of this case is understood. I have some evidence that I believe will clarify things." The room buzzed with whispers. As I reached for my briefcase, I could feel her eyes on me, trying to gauge my next move. The lover shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smugness beginning to crack. As I placed the first document on the table, I caught her gaze. For the first time in months, I saw something other than contempt in her eyes. It was faint, but it was there. Fear. And that was only the beginning. Let me take you back to where it all began, or rather where it all started falling apart. I wasn't looking for signs at first. Why would I trust was a given, a cornerstone of our life together. But trust, as I've learned, is only as strong as the person holding it. And she let it slip through her fingers. It started with the little things. You know how they say, hindsight is 20/20? Well, in hindsight, it was all there, glaring at me like a neon sign. The late nights at work, the sudden enthusiasm for gym class. She never used to care about the way her phone was always face down on the table. But at the time I shrugged it off. We all need our space, right? The first real crack came during our anniversary dinner. I planned everything, a quiet CIT evening at her favorite restaurant, but the entire night her attention was somewhere else. She kept glancing at her phone, smiling at texts. She thought I didn't notice. When I asked her if everything was okay, she gave me that dismissive laugh, the one that makes you feel like you're being paranoid for even asking. I'm just checking something for work, she said, brushing it off. Work. That word became her shield. Whenever I questioned her, it was always work. Extra meetings, last-minute deadlines, team outings. I wanted to believe her hell. I did believe her for a while. Then came the day I found the receipt. It was crumpled in the pocket of her coat, an expensive restaurant I knew I hadn't taken her to. I remember holding it in my hand, staring at the date the same night. She said she was stuck at a late meeting. I didn't confront her right away. Something inside me wanted to deny what I already knew. Instead, I started watching, not obsessively, not at first, just small things. A quick glance at her phone when it buzzed, a mental note of her excuses. It wasn't long before I saw the pattern. Her work meetings always seemed to coincide with nights. Her co-worker, the ever-charming David, was also working late. And then there was the laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from a shared secret. I heard it the first time they came back from a so-called team-building exercise. She introduced him to me that day, and he had the audacity to shake my hand, looking me in the eye as if he wasn't stealing my life from under me. I wanted to punch him then and there, but I didn't. I played the fool, smiled, even invited him into my home for dinner, thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being that jealous husband she always joked about. But the way they looked at each other that night, I knew the confirmation came 3 weeks later. I followed her after she said she was heading to a networking event. I sat in my car across from a boutique hotel watching as they walked in together, her arm linked with his. I sat there for 2 hours gripping. The steering was so hard, my knuckles turned white. When they finally came out, laughing and whispering like teenagers, something inside me snapped. I drove home that night in silence, my mind racing. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand answers. But then I thought, why give them the satisfaction of knowing they got to me? That's when I decided I wasn't going to react. I was going to plan over the next few months. I collected everything: hotel receipts, text message screenshots, even a few photos taken discreetly from a distance. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted to dismantle the entire facade she had built. And then there was David, her lover, the man who thought he was untouchable. He wasn't just after my wife. He was after my life. I found out he had been whispering in her ear, convincing her to go for everything in the divorce: the house, the savings, custody of our son. He was feeding her this idea that she deserved it all, and that I was just an obstacle in the way of their perfect future. The arrogance of it was almost laughable. They thought they were playing me, but they didn't realize I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was the player, and every move they made was leading them closer to the checkmate I had been planning all along. So when I walked into that courtroom, late but deliberate, I wasn't just facing my wife and her lover. I was facing two people who had no idea that their perfect little scheme was about to implode. And trust me, I wasn't going to let them off easy.
Walking into that courtroom was like stepping onto a stage where every actor thought they knew their lines. Except I had rewritten the script. My wife sat there, her lover a few seats behind her, both of them exuding smug confidence. They thought they were about to watch my life crumble. Little did they know. The only thing falling apart today would be their delusions. Her lawyer stood first. He was a tall, sharp-dressed man with the kind of presence that made you think he could talk his way out of a burning building. His voice was smooth, his tone condescending, as he laid out their case. My supposed incompetence, financial irresponsibility, and a host of other exaggerated claims designed to paint me as a man unworthy of anything. My home, my savings, or even my son. I sat there quietly, my face a mask of indifference. Let them pile on the lies. Let the world see their confidence. I wanted everyone to witness the moment that confidence shattered. Your Honor, her lawyer concluded, it is evidence that my client has endured significant hardship in this marriage, and we respectfully request full custody of the child, the marital home, and alimony to secure her future full custody. Alimony. It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. Instead, I let my lawyer, Mr. Grant, handle the formalities. He was a non-nonsense kind of guy, not the type to waste time on theatrics. He stood calmly, adjusted his glasses, and addressed the court with the quiet confidence that silenced the room. Your Honor, Grant began, my client has remained patient and composed throughout these proceedings, despite the baseless accusations leveled against him. However, the time has come to present the truth, and with that the tide began to turn. Grant handed a thick folder to the judge filled with the evidence I had spent months collecting. The judge flipped through it, his expression shifting from curiosity to stern disapproval. The photos of my wife and her lover entering the boutique hotel, the text messages, the receipts. It was all there laid out in black and white. A timeline of betrayal. The courtroom fell silent. Her lawyers stammered, scrambling to object. Your Honor, this evidence. This is a violation of privacy. The judge cut him off. Privacy. Mr. Taylor, your client's actions were neither private nor lawful. I suggest you sit down. For the first time, I allowed myself to glance at her. My wife, soon to be my ex-wife, was no longer smirking. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between the judge, the folder, and me behind her. Her lover shifted uncomfortably. His smugness, replaced by something I could only describe as dread. Grant continued, his voice steady and deliberate. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence of financial misconduct. My client's wife, along with her acquaintance, has been using joint marital funds for personal luxuries and trips. At this, her lover's face turned ashen. He leaned forward, whispering something to her, but she shook her head, too stunned to respond. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the weight of their actions sank in. The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Mrs. Stanley, he said, addressing her directly, is there anything you'd like to say in response to these allegations? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her lawyer stepped in, fumbling for damage control. Your Honor, my client, Shia, we request a recess to review these claims. The judge shook his head, denied, we proceed. And just like that, their facade began to crumble. Grant wasn't finished. He pulled out one last piece of evidence, a signed statement from a private investigator detailing everything from their affair to their attempts to siphon money out of my accounts. The courtroom erupted. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and the gallery whispered with barely contained shock. My wife finally spoke her voice, trembling. This isn't fair. He's just trying to humiliate me. The judge's gaze was cold. Fairness? Mrs. Stanley is not determined by who can lie more convincingly. The fact speaks for themselves. As the hearing continued, I watched her confidence unravel. Piece by piece. Her lover, once her partner in crime, now looked like a man, calculating how quickly he could distance himself from the mess and me. I sat there calm and composed, because this was exactly how I planned it. When the session ended for the day, her lawyer hurried her out of the courtroom, his face red with frustration. Her lover followed close behind, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I stayed behind speaking with Grant about the next steps. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt the eyes of the gallery on me. Some sympathetic, others curious. But I didn't care about their opinions. All that mattered was that I had flipped the narrative. My wife and her lover thought they were pulling the strings, but now they were the puppets tangled in the web they had spun. And this was only the beginning. The real blow was still to come. The next day, I arrived at the courthouse a full hour before the hearing. Unlike my dramatic entrance the day before, today I wanted to be early, calm, settled. Let them think I was here to salvage what was left of my pride. They had no idea what was coming. I sat in the lobby, my briefcase resting beside me, watching people come and go. Lawyers with their arms full of files, clients pacing nervously, and court staff moving with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. It was a controlled chaos, but none of it mattered to me. My focus was razor sharp. I was here for one purpose: to pull the rug out from under my wife and her lover. Adam Sharp, the bailiff, opened the courtroom doors and we filed in. She was already seated, dressed impeccably, as if this was some social event rather than the dismantling of a marriage. Her lover was there too, sitting in the gallery. I caught his eye and gave him the faintest of nods. His smirk faltered, but he quickly looked away. Her lawyer started things off with another impassioned speech, claiming that I was trying to tarnish her reputation with fabricated evidence. He went on about how she had been a devoted wife, a loving mother, and how my accusations were nothing more than desperate attempts to deflect my own shortcomings. I didn't react. Let him talk. When it was my lawyer's turn, Grant stood with the kind of quiet authority that commanded attention. He didn't raise his voice or gesture wildly. He simply began presenting the facts. "Your Honor," he said, sliding a set of documents across the table, "we would like to submit these as evidence of financial misconduct." The judge glanced at the papers, nodding for Grant to proceed. "These bank statements show a series of withdrawals made from the couple's joint account over the past 6 months. The amounts total over $75,000. Furthermore, the withdrawals coincide with payments made to luxury hotels, high-end boutiques, and travel agencies." The courtroom murmured as Grant pulled out another set of documents. "And here, Your Honor, are receipts from those transactions, all signed by the defendant." Her lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. "Mrs. Stanley," the judge said, his voice stern, "do you deny these transactions?" She hesitated, her face pale. I don't recall making those specific withdrawals, really," Grant said, his tone icy but controlled. "Because we all, Al, have surveillance footage from several of these locations. Shall we play it?" Her head snapped toward her lawyer, panic etched across her face. He leaned in, whispering furiously, but it was clear they were out of moves. And then came the piece to resistance. "Your Honor," Grant continued, "we would also like to submit this recording. It's an audio file of a conversation between the defendant and her acquaintance." The courtroom fell silent. I could see her grip the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The audio began to play, and there it was, her voice, laughing with her lover as they discussed how much they could get out of me in the divorce, how she planned to take the house, the money, and even custody of our son, not because she wanted him, but because it would hurt me. The lover's voice chimed in, suggesting that once the settlement was done, They could sell the house and split the proceeds. I didn't turn to look at him, but I could feel his discomfort from across the room. When the recording ended, the judge's face was like stone. "Mrs. Stanley, do you have any explanation for this?" Her lawyer stood, desperate to regain control. "Your Honor, this evidence was obtained illegally." Grant interrupted. "Actually, Your Honor, this recording was provided by a mutual acquaintance who overheard the conversation." "Completely lawful." The judge nodded. "Noted. Proceed." At that moment, I finally looked at her. She wasn't the composed, confident woman who had walked in. Her facade was cracking, and for the first time, I saw the fear beneath it. "Grant wasn't done, Your Honor. Based on this evidence, we request that the court re-evaluate the division of assets as well as custody arrangements. It is clear that my client's wife has acted in bad faith throughout this marriage." The judge called for a brief recess, leaving her and her lawyer scrambling to come up with a response. I stood collecting my papers, and as I walked past her, I leaned in just enough for her to hear me. "You should have been honest," I whispered. "Now everyone knows who you really are." Her lover glared at me, but he didn't say a word. What could he say? The walls were closing in, and I was the one holding the key. When we reconvened, the air in the room was electric. Everyone could feel it. Something big was about to happen, and I was ready. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring they knew I wasn't the fool they thought I was. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. All that was left was to deliver the final blow. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. As we resumed, the air felt charged, heavy. With anticipation, my wife sat rigid in her chair, her once confident demeanor reduced to a nervous, pale shadow. Her lover was no better. He leaned back, arms crossed, but his fidgeting fingers betrayed his growing discomfort. I remained calm. This was the moment I had been building toward. I adjusted my tie and nodded to my lawyer, Grant, signaling that it was time to unleash the next wave of truth. "Your Honor," Grant began, his voice steady and deliberate. "While the evidence we've provided so far highlights the defendant's infidelity and intentions, it's only the beginning. We now turn to the financial misconduct that has plagued this marriage." The judge raised an eyebrow but motioned for him to continue. Grant opened a second folder, one thicker than the last. "These documents," Grant said, holding them up for emphasis, "are records of financial transactions over the past 2 years. My client's wife systematically siphoned funds from their joint account into a private account registered under her name alone." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Her lawyer stood attempting to object, but the judge silenced him. "I'll allow it to continue, Mr. Grant." Grant stepped forward and handed copies to the judge. "Here we see large sums withdrawn on multiple occasions. Some were used to fund personal expenses, including lavish vacations and luxury goods. Others," he paused for effect, "were funneled to an account belonging to the defendant's lover, Mr. David Carlson." Her lover's name hung in the air like a thunderclap. I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't need to. The audible intake of breath from the gallery told me enough. The judge's gaze turned icy as he addressed my wife, Mrs. Stanley. "Is this true?" she stammered, struggling to form a coherent sentence. I don't. That money was... It was for personal use." Grant finished for her, his tone cutting through her excuses like a blade. "And, Your Honor, we have more," he signaled to an assistant, who wheeled in a monitor. Moments later, bank statements and transaction records were displayed for the courtroom to see. Highlighted lines showed transfers to hotel chains, luxury brands, and one particularly damning payment, a $10,000 wire to David Carlson's account labeled as a loan. Mrs. Stanley Grant said, turning to her. Do you deny making these transactions? Her face was a mixture of panic and humiliation. I didn't. I didn't mean to. Grant pressed on, unrelenting. And the $10,000 loan, was that meant to cover expenses for the man you were building a future with, the same man who, by the way, has no steady income and no assets in his name? David's face turned beet red. He stood abruptly ready to protest, but the judge silenced him with a single glare. This is highly irregular, her lawyer interjected, clearly desperate to regain control. My client's financial decisions are her prerogative. Grant cut him off. Not when those funds come from a shared marital account. Not when my client's resources are being misused to support an affair. The judge nodded, his expression grim. I've heard enough, Mrs. Stanley. Do you have anything to say in your defense? She looked at her lawyer, then at me as if hoping for some kind of reprieve. But there was none. This has been a misunderstanding, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. A misunderstanding. I couldn't help but interject my voice, calm but firm. You mean the months of lying, the financial deceit, and the plans to take everything? For me, that kind of misunderstanding. Her eyes darted away. Unable to meet mine, Grant stepped back, letting the evidence speak for itself. The judge leaned forward, his hands clasped on the bench. Mr. Stanley, he said, turning to me, do you have any final statements regarding these allegations? I stood, meeting his gaze directly. Your Honor, I worked hard for everything we had. I trusted her with not just our finances, but our future, and she took advantage of that trust. All I ask is for fairness, for the court to see what she's done and make a judgment accordingly. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mr. Stanley. I'll take all evidence under consideration. As I sat back down, I stole a glance at her lover. He looked like a man realizing the walls were closed, clinging. And they were, because this wasn't just about proving their betrayal. It was about ensuring they felt the weight of every action they had taken. The session ended with a call for closing arguments to be presented the next day. As we filed out, her lawyer hurried her down the hallway, whispering furiously. David trailed behind them, looking more like a kicked dog than the smug man he had been just days ago. I walked out of that courtroom knowing I had shifted the scales. They thought they were untouchable, but now they were the ones scrambling for footing, and the best part, the hardest blow was still yet to come. The courtroom was quieter than usual. The next day the air felt heavier, like everyone knew something monumental was about to happen. Even her smugness, which had been her armor, was gone. My wife sat in silence, her lover conspicuously absent this time, likely too ashamed to face the fallout. I sat across from her, calm and composed, my focus now entirely on one thing: Donald, our son. He was the only reason I had tolerated her antics for as long as I had. But today, that tolerance ended. Today I was going to make sure he stayed with me where he belonged. Her lawyer, still trying to recover from the financial blow we had delivered, shuffled his papers nervously. Your Honor, he began, we will now address the matter of custody for the minor child, Donald Stanley. The judge nodded and turned to me. Mr. Stanley, as the father, do you wish to pursue custody of the child? I stood, my voice steady but passionate. Yes, Your Honor. I believe it is in Donald's best interest to remain with me. I have always provided for him, cared for him, and been his primary source of stability. My wife, while his mother has shown a pattern of neglect and poor judgment, her lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. These are baseless accusations. Grant, ever unflappable, countered smoothly. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence to support my client's claims. The judge raised a hand, silencing both sides.
Proceed.
Grant turned to the projector screen and, with a click, images began to appear. Pictures of Donald left alone at home while she was out with her lover.
A time-stamped video of him calling me late at night, crying because his mother hadn't returned home. A series of messages she had sent me, delegating her parental responsibilities because she was too busy. Her lawyer tried to object again, but the judge waved him down. This evidence is admissible. Let's hear the explanation from Mrs. Stanley. She stood, visibly shaken. Your Honor, those were isolated incidents. I've always provided for Donald, and I love my son deeply. Yet you left him alone.
Grant interjected, his voice firm but controlled on multiple occasions, to pursue a relationship with another man. Is that love, or is that neglect?
Hands trembled as she struggled to respond. I didn't mean he was safe.
Grant didn't let up. Safe. A crying child left a fin for himself while you were at hotels with your lover. Is that your definition of safe? Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear for her reputation, but fear of losing. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Stanley, do you have any additional statements? I stood again, looking directly at him. Your Honor, my son, deserves stability and love. I've been there for him every step of the way. I helped him with his homework, took him to his doctor's appointments, and stayed up with him when he had nightmares. I didn't delegate those responsibilities. I live them, and I can't stand the thought of him being used as a pawn. This isn't about revenge, Your Honor. It's about what's right for Donald. He needs someone who puts him first always, and that person is me. The judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned to her. Mrs. Stanley, your husband has presented compelling evidence of your neglect. Do you have anything to refute his claims? She opened her mouth but closed it again, shaking her head. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Finally, the judge addressed the courtroom. C is the most critical issue in this case. After reviewing the evidence and hearing both parties, I will make my ruling. The tension in the room was palpable. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse pounding. This was it. Everything I had fought for came down to this moment. Donald Stanley, the judge, began. We reside with his father, Michael Stanley. Mrs. Stanley will retain visitation rights pending further evaluation. A wave of relief washed over me. I could barely contain the emotion welling up inside. My son would stay with me. I glanced at her, expecting anger, but what I saw was worse. Defeat. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized the full extent of what she'd lost. Not just the house, not just the money, but the one person who truly mattered. The session ended, and as the courtroom cleared, I took a moment to breathe. It was over. I had won, not just for myself, but for Donald. Walking out, I spotted her sitting on a bench, her head in her hands for a moment. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the nights Donald cried himself to sleep, and I knew she had no one to blame but herself. This wasn't about revenge or winning. It was about ensuring my son had the life he deserved, and now he would. The Khatum victory was mine, but I wasn't done yet. Custody of Donald was secure, and my wife's arrogant confidence had crumbled. But there was one more piece of the puzzle. David Carlson, her so-called lover. He thought he could waltz into my life, take what wasn't his and walk away unscathed. He was about to learn otherwise. After the custody ruling, I turned my attention to him. David had been conspicuously absent during the final days of the hearing, probably realizing he'd outstayed his welcome in this charade. But his absence didn't mean he was out of my reach. You see, while I'd been gathering evidence against my wife, I'd also done some digging into David. What I found wasn't surprising, but it was damning.
The man was a fraud through and through. He had a long history of exploiting people, jumping from one wealthy partner to another, always leaving a trail of financial ruin in his wake. But what made him truly vulnerable was his job, or rather, his former job. David worked in upper management for a mid-sized company, and he had been skimming funds from his employer for years. A few discreet conversations with people in his office, and I had all the proof I needed. I didn't confront him directly. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I sent an anonymous tip to his employer, complete with copies of the financial records I'd acquired. Within a week, David was fired, escorted out of the building by security while his colleagues whispered and pointed. But I didn't stop there. David, like most opportunists, had a fragile ego. He thrived on appearances, on maintaining an image of success. So I made sure everyone in his social circle knew the truth. Photos of him and my wife at the hotel, details of his affair with a married woman, and even snippets of their recorded conversations found their way to the right people. His reputation, once polished and enviable, was now a source of gossip and ridicule. The final blow came when I exposed the $10,000 my wife had funneled into his account. That money wasn't just proof of their betrayal. It was also a legal liability. My lawyer ensured the authorities were informed, and David was soon facing charges of fraud and embezzlement. I heard through the grapevine that his so-called friends abandoned him and his landlord served him an eviction notice when he couldn't pay the rent. The man who had once strutted into court with smug arrogance was now a pariah, jobless, homeless, and utterly humiliated. I never spoke to David directly throughout all of this. There was no need. My actions spoke louder than any words could. But I did hear about a run-in he had with my wife. Shortly after everything fell apart for him, she had gone to see him, perhaps hoping for some kind of solace or reassurance. Instead, he lashed out at her, blaming her for his downfall. "You ruined my life," he reportedly shouted as neighbors watched from their windows. "You promised me everything, and now I have nothing." It was almost poetic, the two of them once so united in their scheming, we now tearing each other apart. I'd like to say I felt some sort of vindication, but honestly, it wasn't about David. It was never about him. He was a symptom, not the disease. My focus was always on rebuilding my life and protecting my son. David's downfall was just a bonus, a reminder that people like him never win in the end. Still, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction knowing he'd finally gotten what he deserved. He had walked into my life thinking he was untouchable, and now he was the one left with nothing. As for me, I moved forward. My son was safe. My future was a mine to shape, and the toxic chapter of my life that had included David Carlson was firmly closed. Justice had been served, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free after the courtroom debacle and David's downfall. My ex-wife, was left to confront the mess she had created. Watching her in that courtroom as the judge announced the final custody ruling and dismissed her financial claims was one thing, but what followed afterward was something I hadn't fully anticipated. She wasn't the woman I'd married anymore. That version of her, the one I had once loved and admired, was long gone. What remained was a hollow shell of someone who had gambled everything and lost. It started immediately after the hearing. As we left the courtroom, her lawyer was already distancing himself, muttering something about needing to reevaluate their strategy for any appeals. She didn't even respond. She just stood there, staring into space, clutching her purse, like it was the only thing she had left. I walked past her without a word. There was nothing to say, but as I reached the door, I heard her voice, low and trembling. "Michael, wait." I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were red tears threatening to spill over. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. I didn't mean for things to end like this,"
she stammered.
I just thought you thought what I interrupted. That you could lie, cheat, and take everything from me. That I just roll over and let you destroy my life.
Her lips quivered, and for a moment I thought she might lash out, but instead she broke down.
Tears streamed down her face as she choked out. I didn't mean to lose everything. I didn't think it would end like this. Her despair was palpable, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore.
She wasn't crying for what she had done to me or our son. She was crying for herself, for the life she thought she deserved but had thrown away. You made your choices, I said, my tone unyielding. You chose him. You chose to betray me, and now you're facing the consequences. Don't expect me to feel sorry for you. I walked away, leaving her standing there sobbing in the hallway. It was a harsh moment, but one that felt necessary over the next few weeks. Her life continued to unravel. Without the financial security she had banked on, she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. David was no longer in the picture. Having disappeared after his public humiliation and legal troubles, she was alone, drowning in the aftermath of her own decisions. Mutual friends told me she had tried to reach out to them, looking for support. But even they had distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had betrayed her husband and abandoned her family for a fleeting affair. Then there was the house she had fought so hard to keep it, only to realize she couldn't afford the mortgage on her own. The bank foreclosed within months, and she was forced to move into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. I'd like to say I felt nothing when I heard about her struggles, but that wouldn't be entirely true. There was a part of me, a small human part, that pitied her. But that pity was outweighed by the memory of everything she had done. She reached out to me once, about a month after the hearing. I was surprised to see her name pop up on my phone screen, and even more surprised when I answered and heard her voice. Michael, she said, her tone hesitant. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Sorry for what I asked. Not bothering to hide my bitterness for everything, she replied. For what I did to you, to Donald, to us. I was stupid and selfish, and I don't know how to make it right. I took a deep breath, letting her words hang in the air. You can't? I said. Finally, what's done is done. All you can do now is live with it. There was a long pause, and then she whispered, Do you think Donald will ever forgive me? That's up to him, I replied. But if you want his forgiveness, you'll have to earn it. And that starts with being honest with him, with yourself. She thanked me, softly, before hanging up. It was the last time I heard from her directly. I've heard bits and pieces about her since then. How she's trying to rebuild her life. How she's working a menial job just to make ends meet. But I don't dwell on it. She's no longer my problem, no longer my responsibility. Her despair was the natural result of her choices, a stark reminder that betrayal and greed come with a cost. And while I wouldn't say I found joy in her suffering, I did find closure. For the first time in years, I could look forward without the weight of her shadow hanging over me. My life was my own again, and I intended to make the most of it. The courtroom battles were over, the verdicts delivered, and the dust had finally settled. I had walked through fire and come out the other side. The house, the money, the custody of my son, all of it had been secured. But what mattered most wasn't the tangible victories. It was the freedom, the sense of reclaiming my life. As I stood in the quiet of my new home, looking out the window at the golden light of a setting sun, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Donald's laughter echoed from the backyard where he played fetch with our newly adopted dog, a scruffy mudhead named Buddy. It was a simple scene, but it held more joy than any lavish vacation or fancy dinner I'd ever experienced in my former life. Donald had been hesitant at first, unsure of the changes, but with each day I could see him blossoming, his smile becoming brighter, his steps lighter. He wasn't just my son. He was my reason for pushing through the darkness, my anchor when the storms raged. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Of course, there were nights when the silence felt oppressive, when the memories of betrayal crept in, threatening to pull me back into bitterness. But I had learned something through this ordeal. Holding on to anger only hurts the one carrying it, and I refused to let her or her choices have any more power over me. One day, Donald came home from school with a drawing in his hand. It was a crude but heartfelt picture of the two of us standing together with Buddy wagging his tail beside us above it. In large, blocky letters he had written, "My family." I knelt down to his level, pulling him into a hug. "I'm proud of you, Buddy," I whispered. "Are you happy, Dad?" he asked, looking up at me with those earnest eyes that always saw straight to the heart of things. "I am," I replied honestly, because we're together and, no matter what, we'll always have each other. The days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, life began to take on a new rhythm. I threw myself into my work, rediscovered old hobbies, and even started making new friends. I wasn't rushing into anything, but I allowed myself to imagine a future where happiness wasn't a fleeting concept, but a constant companion. As for my ex-wife, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling to piece her life back together. Her lover had vanished, her social circle had dwindled, and the house she fought so hard to claim was long gone. There was a certain poetic justice in it all, but I didn't dwell on her downfall. She had made her choices, just as I had made mine. One sunny afternoon, as Donald and I were working in the garden, well, I was working and he was mostly chasing Buddy around, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. The betrayal, the court battles, the sleepless nights, they were all chapters in a story that had led me to this moment, and in this moment, I was free. That night, as I tucked Donald into bed, he reached up and hugged me tightly. "I'm glad we're home, Dad," he said sleepily. I kissed his forehead, my heart full. "Me too, Buddy, me too." In the quiet of the evening, I sat on the porch, the stars twinkling above, and thought about how far I'd come. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I faced it with hope. This wasn't just a new beginning. It was our beginning. A life built on trust, resilience, and love. And as I closed my eyes and listened to the peaceful sounds of the night, I knew one thing for certain. We were going to be okay. Better than okay. We were going to thrive.